Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbard Gaming. Today I've got another episode of How About That, the series in which I take a look at a game that's impressive in one way or another for the hardware on which it appeared. In this episode I'll be showing you a complete playthrough with commentary of the Sega Master System port of Taito's Sagaia. So what if I told you that the best horizontally scrolling shooter, or shmup, released on the Sega Master System was programmed by Japanese developers, but only ever released in Europe and Brazil, and in 1992 at that. It may sound a little odd, but it's true, and today you'll see why. Now, Taito originally released Darius II into the arcades in 1989 on one of their giant 3-screen arcade cabinets. A version on a smaller 2-screen cabinet followed, and there were ports to a few systems like the Genesis/Mega Drive and the PC Engine CD. On some platforms, in some regions, the game was known as Sagaia. But don't confuse it with Game Boy Sagaia, which, while also part of the Darius series, is not a port of Darius II. You'd probably expect tons of content to be cut from the 16-bit 26-level arcade monster of a release, and, well, you'd be right. But you might be surprised at just how much of the feel of the original they managed to maintain on this tiny little 8-bit system with a 512 kilobyte, or 4 megabit, cartridge. And on that note, let's just get on with it. Stick around to the end for some final thoughts and comments. Alright, here's our fancy title screen. And we're underway! And look at this! You're greeted right at the start to what looks like impressive line scrolling on the little 8-bit Sega Master System from 1986. Now, as you can see, this is a pretty impressive looking game for the hardware that it's on, right? And we've got animated flames down at the bottom, there's lots of enemies and bullets on screen, and it's got really just a lot going on, more than you would typically expect out of a Sega Master System horizontally scrolling shoot-'em-up. Now, we can talk a little bit about what's missing from here right at the start, so you won't be too disappointed with anything. And the first thing is it's missing the 2-player simultaneous play from the arcade release. It has way fewer levels than the arcade and Genesis ports of the game. Obviously, we don't have any FM sound. This one is PSG only, but they've done a decent job, with the PSG music on it. But overall, they've retained most of what made the arcade game so good. Now here's something that you're probably not going to love so much, and there is quite a bit of flicker on here in some areas, like during this boss fight. There are also some parts where we'll see the game slow down a bit. But that's kind of just something that goes with the territory on 8-bit systems, that are putting out shoot-'em-ups. Something else that is pretty obvious from the start here is this game is not running at a fluid 60 frames per second like some other games in the genre, but even running at about 30 or maybe less, it still looks great. Because most recently I took a look at the Famicom port of Gradius II, and that one doesn't have any kind of parallax or any really fancy effects, but it was silky smooth. This game takes sort of the opposite design theory, where they tried to put as many fancy effects from the 16-bit arcade version as they could onto it, but subsequently they had to drop the frame rate. And as you can see from this section I just made it through there, there's also quite a bit of slowdown in some places when there's a lot going on at once. And yeah, a lot of these sprites are smaller than the arcade or even the Genesis versions of the game, but still super impressive. Look at all that! Remember, this is a little 8-bit system. Look at all that's going on here. And I'm gonna assume that this game didn't have a huge development budget, and it didn't have a ton of people working on it, because they knew it wasn't going to release worldwide in every region, so that makes what they've accomplished here even all the more impressive. Alright, here comes our first boss fight. And yeah, we do have to go to the black screen because, like a lot of 8-bit games, the bosses are actually backgrounds for the most part. So the background has to go away while they're on screen. As you can see, just like the arcade and Genesis versions, we do have the sort of smart bomb thing there. Wasn't playing very nice, so it was staying out of my range. And then we do even have the section where you turn around and fight it from the other side. So here we will get a chance to hit the bomb and blow it up. And there you go, that is the end of Zone A. So now, as you can see, quite a few levels have been cut. There were 26 in the arcade original. We've got about half of that here. And look at level 2 here, our second one for, well, Zone B at least. Yeah, we've got much more simulated parallax here. So they've done this with raster effects, basically splitting the screen into regions that they have scroll at different speeds. And, I mean, the effect is super impressive. I mean, this looks almost as good as a lot of 16-bit titles. And once again, we've got just a ton of stuff going on at the screen on one time here. And we did have a little bit of flicker right there, which is to be expected. Another thing that's impressive that this game retains is pretty much all the power levels for your weapons from the arcade original. Now, it is cut back a little bit, and you'll see that the size of some of your shots are smaller in this one than in, say, the Genesis or arcade releases. But we won't have to deal with that problem for a few levels yet. You might be wondering why it seemed like there was a big empty area there. That was just because I killed the mini-boss a lot faster than you're normally expected to. And believe me, it's not always easy to do that. Still, I sometimes have trouble killing that one at all. But if you can get him early, it's actually easier to kill him quickly than it is to have him linger. And also point out once again that the PSG music we have in this game, it's alright. I mean, songs are good, they're well done, they're recognizable. But yeah, like a lot of PSG music, it's a little samey. There's not much to distinguish it or make one level sound vastly different from another. Although they do manage to infuse the soundtrack on this game with at least some personality. And we are making our way through this level towards the end. And just, I mean, look at how many of those things are on screen and the way that they form up. I mean, I just can't stress enough how impressive this game is for the hardware. Now, difficulty-wise, you may be wondering what this is like. It's going to be tough when you first play it, especially if you're not used to the game on other platforms. But it's not too bad. It's actually a lot easier than I would say the Genesis version, which is in itself dramatically easier than the arcade version. The arcade version of Darius II, by the way, insanely hard on certain parts. Not Gradius levels of hard, but hard. And once again, we're going to a black screen for the boss fight. And yeah, this one is really slow, and there's a lot of flicker. Still pretty impressive, but yeah, definitely pushing what the hardware can do. I mean, look at the speed of those bullets. And yeah, you'll feel it in the controls when the game slows down this much, which thankfully doesn't happen very often. And for this boss in the arcade, when he shoots those lasers out of his mouth, they're a lot bigger and a lot faster. And we've almost got him here. There we are. And yep, here we go for Phase 2 of this version of the game's boss. Again, should look pretty familiar to Darius II players from other platforms. And then, nope! You think you get him? Psych! He's back! Which, that's one of the cruelest tricks I've ever seen a game developer play. Make it look like the boss is exploding and then just toss him right back into the mix, immediately. Anyway, there we go. We've finished our second phase. And whichever Stage 2 you selected, it doesn't matter. Stage 3 is going to be Zone D. Alright, and here we are in Zone D. And as you can see, this is the first level in the game that doesn't really have some kind of fancy background effect going on. But what it does have are tons of sprites on screen all at once. And yeah, don't think that this is because of some cutback from this version of the game. Even the arcade and Genesis versions are similar when you get to the equivalent level. Now the one thing that is different, of course, which we've already talked about, is a lot of the sprites are quite a bit smaller in this version than some other versions, and that we do see here. But it's hard to really fault it for that, especially when we have so much going on at various parts like the opening section of the level. And it's great that they were able to retain pretty much all of the enemy attack patterns, including the ones that do big, sweeping, really fast circles. What I'll also point out here is while I said the music is not particularly impressive, and it's not, we do have a fun little jaunty tune for this level in our little space adventure. So, I do like the music here, even though it's not particularly, technically fantastic for the system. And here's a mini-boss that I can't stand, because as easy as it is, it manages to quite often get at least one shot in on me, but that's okay, he's dead now. Again, we're seeing a big empty area here because it gives you this allotment of time to deal with that mini-boss. When you're fully powered up, you can just go in and, blast it and take it out quickly. Now, speaking of blasting it and taking it out quickly, one other thing I should mention about this game in general, for those not familiar with it, is that if you die in this game, you lose all your power-ups and you go back to your pea shooter, and every single thing goes down all of its weapon levels back to the original default state. So your main fire, your regular cannon fire here, let's call it, that comes out of the front of the ship, the lasers, and the missiles all drop down to their default settings. Now, unlike some games, this one does at least try to help you make up for a little bit in later levels by giving you a special power-up that will automatically power up all of those things really quickly at once. But even with that, if you die in this game, it is really, really hard to get powered fully up again to the way you were before you died. And this is one of those games where if you don't have your power-ups in the later levels, you're probably not going to be able to finish it. I do wish on this level, even though it looks similar to the arcade and Genesis versions, that there was a little more going on in the background. They could have added some stars scrolling at different speeds or something. Just a few here and there. Anyway, here comes our third level boss. Good old Darius II. And yeah, he is a gigantic snake thing. And on this one, I kind of wonder why they didn't keep the background on. Since he's not a background, he is a selection of sprites. I guess they maybe just did it for consistency, since none of the other bosses have backgrounds behind them. Or at least none of the ones I remember. Okay, then after Zone D, we once again have a choice of two different zones. You can see here I've chosen E, and we're back to having some nice fancy effects. So here we've got sort of the surface of the moon, we've got another layer with some mountains, and then another layer with the stars. And here you can also see the feature of the missiles that I have right now that trace along the ground, sort of like Gradius. And once more, there's quite a bit going on at different times in this one, and some of the enemies here are really fast. And for the power level of your main fire on the ship, sort of the cannon thing that I described before, this is where it starts to really get a bit different from the Genesis and arcade versions. It becomes like a large ball in the Genesis and arcade ones. Here it becomes sort of a thinner, pill-shaped thing. And if you're wondering why that is, it's just because of the limits of the capabilities of the Master System. It can't have too many big sprites on the screen at once, so You know, they're using alternative methods to do this stuff. And once again, we've got a little bit of a lull there. Not too bad, because we could have fought the mini-boss for longer. I wish they'd just put in a check to see if the mini-boss is dead and threw some little enemies at you in these spaces. I was always super annoyed by these stupid enemies that just show up in those patterns where they come from the top and bottom of the screen like that. The original Darius used to do that also. And Darius II, by the way, vastly superior to the original game. Darius II was great. Darius I is kinda primitive and stinky. And again, not a whole lot going on in this section, but that's alright. Everything here is pretty smooth. You can see we haven't seen too much slowdown or flicker in this level either. Another thing I'll point out with sort of the, what I'll call pseudo-parallax that they use the raster effects for, the layers can't overlap, so that's why you see the mountains sitting just above the craters. If you ever see it in some games where they have little tiny sections that overlap, they're usually using sprites to do that. You know, particularly on systems that don't have multiple hardware scrolling layers built in. Here they just elected to have black under the mountains in that area. Alright, here comes our boss of this stage, Red Crab. And hey, we've got a little tiny semblance of a background here. And I do think it's interesting, again, that in a little 8-bit system port like this, they've managed to retain things like blowing up sections of bosses. That wasn't something we saw a lot of in the 8-bit days. And while the bosses may look easy during this playthrough, again, if you get to them without having, you know, your fully powered up weapons, they can seem next to impossible. Alright, next up we head to Earth. And once again, we've got multiple layers. And this time we have some nice little colorful backgrounds. This is the maximum stage for the sort of front-facing cannon firepower from the ship at this point, so you're not going to see any of the projectiles get any larger. Still have to do some missile power-ups here. I don't remember in this version if the laser gets more powered up than this one. It does in the arcade and Genesis ones, but this might be it for the Master System. We'll see. I just don't remember. It's been a while since I recorded this footage. And we've got way fewer of these little rotating things than we would see in other versions of the game. Again, due to sprite limitations. And because the Master System can't really, easily transition because of the lack of extra backgrounds in the hardware, they just sort of have you fly off the screen and then fly into the screen on this part. And once again, it's pretty fancy. We've got, several cloud layers, a couple of background layers, and a foreground layer. Again, all using the raster effect trick. And I guess the laser still had some power-ups left in them. There's another one right there. There should still be one more if it sticks to the arcade and Genesis ones. I just honestly don't remember. We'll see. We'll find out together. And I did get the missile power-up, which changes the missiles into just little rolling bombs. And again, these backgrounds are so nice and smooth. I mean, it really is approaching the quality of some 16-bit ports of the game. Again, looking at this, I mean, it's hard not to be impressed. Imagine if this much effort had been put into, especially earlier Sega Master System games. getting towards the end of the level here, I think. Yep, looks like it. Yamato. Let's take out Yamato, shall we? And there's maybe a little bit of jank aligning the sprites with some background tiles on this one, but it looks alright. This doesn't fire nearly as many shots as in the 16-bit versions of it. And wait, we're not done yet. That's right, it's a robotic hermit crab. And then you've still got to blow up another part of him. And there's the end of the G-Zone. So next up we have a choice between two levels, and then each of these last two levels, well, I should say each of these current two levels, has a choice of two levels at the end also. So there's 3 possible final stages to this game. And once again, pretty impressive here. Lots of layers of scrolling. Things are slowing down a bit though. And if I have one complaint about this game, just from a design standpoint, it would be that there could have stood to have been a little bit more of interaction with the backgrounds. Right, so most levels have a floor, some have a ceiling. A lot have only a floor or a ceiling, or neither. So there's plenty of shooting action, but I think that's the one thing that, design-wise, sort of holds Darius II back a little bit from being an absolute classic, even though it's a game that I've liked a lot, for a long time. Yet we see a little more traces of slowdown and flicker, but there was a lot of stuff going on there. Sometimes the flashing bullets here can be a little distracting, but I understand why they did it. And so you can see the bullets sort of no matter what color the background is or what's going on in the background. I'll once again point out that the music is pretty well converted to the Sega Master System. I just wish that companies didn't have to put up with the ancient sound chip that Sega had decided to make the primary sound chip for its Sega Master System. They should have gone with something newer in '86. And here we go again with an assault of space rocks, just for no reason. Okay, it looks like there was another laser power-up level there. So this should be the fully powered-up laser. I do believe every weapon is fully powered up at this point. So looking at all that, that is quite the arsenal for a little 8-bit horizontally scrolling shooter, isn't it? And I'm sure that is playing a factor in why things are slowing down so much on this level. So with the amount of all that fire and the enemies on the screen and all that stuff going on with the scrolling all at once, that is going to tax that little hardware, that little CPU, the poor little Z80 that's in there. It's really doing its best on this one. Then we'll have another transition here. And look at the detail on that background layer. I mean, that looks almost as good as what we see in the Genesis one. Again, that is just really, really impressive. It looks great. The artistry on this one is just fantastic. And this is a lot of effort put into a game that was coming out late, that was not going to be released in many regions of the world. I can't help but think if effort like this was put into most other titles, that the Master System would have enjoyed a lot more success worldwide than it did. I mean, it was of course really big in Europe and Brazil, but in Japan and the US, not really. It kind of struggled in both regions and never really gained a foothold. Sadly, we only get a short little section of that background in this version of the game. In the Genesis version, and even in the arcade, that section's longer. And look at this one, for this boss fight, we're going to be scrolling through it. And everything is really, really slowed down on this part. And you can see why. It's because it's got all these limbs moving all at once. And that is really choppy. This one they probably should have tried a little differently. This is just too much for the hardware, and it really affects control on this part. And you see, as soon as you take the arms out, everything goes back to being nice and smooth and responsive. So I don't know what the answer would have been there. Maybe just use like animated background tiles to move the arms around a little bit. But whatever, whatever. But no matter what, they sort of chose poorly there. And unfortunately, that's a bit of a mistake that they're going to repeat shortly in the next level. Alright, and to begin our final level, we're back to this line-scrolling effect here. Not only that, we've got simulated lightning strikes in the background. Now on this one, the choppiness of the effect, it makes it a little kind of painful to watch at times, because the frame rate does drop and dip in this section. So in the end here, it's undeniably impressive that they managed to get all this stuff running at the same time on the Master System, right? That we've got the effect going on in the background, that we've got all these sprites on the screen, all the game logic being tracked. It was all just maybe a little too ambitious. And I don't know if this is, legit line scrolling or if they're using animated tiles to just simulate the effect. But either way, they probably should have toned it down a little bit for the sake of keeping the game smoother. And as we progress a little bit further into the level here, you'll see we sort of have the trifecta of gameplay experience annoyances. We see slowdown, we see flicker, and we see frame rate reduction. And I can deal with any of these problems as they crop up. It's just that, as a developer, you've got to know when too much is too much. And the other problem with all that stuff is this level is really long. Maybe because of all the extreme slowdown in it. But, it feels like it's long. And the length might have even been okay if there was more interesting things happening on it, but it's all very, very samey, You've got basically the same patterns of enemies coming at you over the length of the entire level. You'll see like 4 or 5 basic enemy patterns, almost from start to finish, with just a few other things interrupting that pattern every now and then. From a design standpoint, what they could have really used in this level was another section. Maybe make half of it in front of the line-scrolling style clouds, and then, throw a surprise section in, maybe that's not in the original, or from another level in the original, just to shake things up a little bit. And seeing this will also make me heartily recommend that if you've never played this game and you're a fan of shooters or shmups, I highly recommend the Genesis version of the game. While it is cut down visually from the arcade version, it plays great, and it is actually reduced in a way that makes it more fun to play than that one. And at the risk of upsetting the very, shall we say, protective PC Engine fanbase, I don't really like the PC Engine CD version very much, only because it's zoomed in really close to the ship, which makes that version a lot harder to play. On the Genesis version, while all the sprites are smaller and everything, it's more zoomed out, and while it's nothing like playing the 3-screen arcade original, it at least mimics the feel of the arcade one a little bit better. There is of course also an excellent Saturn version that actually lets you control how zoomed in you are. The Saturn version famously lets both players sort of just scale the game whenever they want, at will, which can make for some interesting situations. And yeah, just look at everything going on here all at once now. They are pushing the poor little Sega Master System to the breaking point. And you can see it in the frame rate drop here especially. And, gonna have to live dangerously now, no shield. And I'd say there are a few things as terrifying in life as having no shield at the end of Sagaia / Darius II. And while what I told you earlier is absolutely true about if you die and lose your power-ups, the game gets next to impossible, there's one kind of silly little exception to that coming right up. Anyway, let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. Instead, let's go through yet another swarm of these repeating enemy patterns that we've seen throughout the entire level so far. I mean, how many times do we have to prove that we can kill the same enemies that it's been throwing at us for like the last, 5 minutes at this point? The answer is, a lot. A real lot. And we're still trucking along here. Slowing down to ridiculous proportions with that frame rate. Oh, that was terrible. Now we're back up to an acceptable level once everything is off the screen. And look at that. Finally, mercifully, we are headed to the boss. There are a few different final bosses in the arcade game. Here we've got something that sort of recalls all the little spheres that you blast at the beginning of bosses in the original Darius. Yeah, that's it. That's it. So if you manage to get there with your power-ups, which it looks like they don't expect you to, that last boss takes like a couple of shots once he materializes and he's gone. For our ending, we've got some nice artwork here. Well, nice by 8-bit console standards. And look at that, I'm going to be praised by all the descendants of Darius. Isn't that nice? Every descendant is going to praise me. There is not one that won't. And oh, 8-bit shmups. You gotta love how they have the whole concept of just one little ship is going to take on an entire war and just take out every single enemy by itself. Anyway, here's our credits list, as you can see. Not a ton of people worked on this game. Really, when all is said and done, it's kinda just a handful of people. Music director and a music composer. Seems a little odd for an 8-bit, PSG soundtrack like this one, but there you are. So really all that's left to say at this point is great job to everyone involved in making this game. I mean, putting this effort into a super late title that wasn't going to be released into even the major gaming regions, I mean, it shows that they actually cared about producing a quality port. As I've said a few times already, they really pushed the Sega Master System to its absolute limit to get the most impressive visual effects they possibly could out of the system. So stick around for a few closing thoughts on the matter, and what this port of Darius II meant as a Sega Master System title, and also in the scheme of things as a Darius II port in general. So there you go, a complete playthrough of the most impressive side-scrolling shooter released on the SMS. Actually, let's call it a horizontal shooter, since it scrolls in lots of directions. Now, it's too bad we didn't see a US release of this game, but it's also totally understandable. The Sega Master System was pretty much dead as a doornail here in 1992. The Genesis version had come out a year earlier, and while the SMS Sagaia is impressive, the Genesis release is still a lot better. But the simulated parallax, line-scrolling, huge bosses, and crazy weapon power-ups we see in SMS Sagaia are quite a sight to behold on the little 8-bit SMS from 1986. So bravo, dev team. Tell me, what did you think of Sega Master System Sagaia? Did you even know that this game existed? What do you think is the most visually impressive SMS game out there? Let me know in the comments. And that'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed it, please toss it a like and share it online somewhere. If you haven't yet, hey, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you'll never miss one of my videos. If you want to support the work that I do here, you can now do that with a channel membership, which is brand new, or Patreon or Ko-fi with links to follow and also in the description. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.